So we've got a very cool speaker tonight, so I thought I'd introduce him, and we'll do some Q&A at the end, and we'll just close off. Before we start, anyone new to the user group, first time coming through tonight? That's brilliant. Now, I hope that's because the topic's very awesome, and we've got a really cool speaker, but we look forward to seeing you at future talks as well. And then the other thing to talk about is just a quick call out, because I probably will forget. We're still looking for speakers. We're planning to do a lightning talk round of presentations in November. Please give it some thought. I'm definitely not a public speaker, so if I can do this, I reckon you guys can as well. Lightning talks essentially are a short topic of your choice. Obviously AWS focused. The theme we're aiming for is MCP. And if you're not sure what that is, you'll have to do some homework on that one. Alright, so without ado, the speaker tonight is based in Sydney. He's flown in specifically for this talk, so it's absolute commendable effort. It's off the back of a talk roadshow. He's done this talk in Melbourne and Sydney. He's based in Sydney, so that wouldn't have been far to travel. He's got family in Perth, so this is quite a cool experience for him. And he's been with Versent for 8 years. And his name's Richard, I'll bring him up in a sec. He's been working with Versent for 8 years, started in the professional services business. He's done a few projects around platformation build and migration, moved across the product, and is now in the advisory space, so obviously as a principal solution architect. I think what's really cool to stand out is his contributions to the AWS Landing Zone Accelerator. So he's done the most external contributions globally, and I think that's super commendable for the product set that he's going to talk about tonight. So please welcome to the stage, Richard.
So apparently this mic isn't too sensitive, so I'll kind of dance around with it. Cool. So thanks. This is a talk again. We're going to talk through the healthcare landing zone that we built for a customer in obviously New South Wales. So for those that have been to the user group before, Versent has probably done a little bit of intro in the past, but this is Versent in a nutshell. We have multiple practices across digital data, cloud, and security. Again, I'm in the advisory space, so that kind of covers those multiple practices. Some of the other key standouts is we have a modern build capability, and that's all around typically like project engagements, right? So we go there, deliver an outcome, and we leave you be, as it were. But we also offer a modern run, and that allows you to keep focusing on whatever other capabilities you need to focus on, where we can kind of keep running that for you over time. I'm not going to labour this point because, yeah, it's a pretty good intro. I do have a shiny QR code up there if you do want to pass on any feedback. As critical as you want to be, I do love a little bit of a roasting, so feel free to slam any comments in there. This was just a screenshot of me, a photo of me from Summit earlier this year. I don't know why, but we decided to sit front row, which is kind of a unique experience with AI-driven music, which was, again, a very new experience for us at Summit. So, very brief agenda, but it is quite a long talk. So what is a landing zone, the customer problem statement, and the solution that we provided for the customer. So what is a landing zone? So this is the AWS Cloud Adoption Framework. And I suppose what this diagram really tries to show is kind of through these to achieve these business outcomes, you typically have these transformational domains. And what this diagram attempts to show is that the technology transformational domain will lead on to process change, organization change, and ultimately product change and how you operate. But underpinning all these transformational domains, you have these foundational capabilities. Obviously, we're here at a tech talk, so we are going to talk a lot about tech, but that's not to overlook how the business operates, how people work, etc., etc. So, what is not a landing zone? And I love this because pretty much every customer I've gone to, at least in the last 2-3 years, this is a very common practice. So, we have a developer interacting with their current corporate data center. They're kind of really frustrated with this long lead time to provision infrastructure. For example, they put firewall rules into a spreadsheet and then somebody does some changes, it takes a week, 2 weeks, you don't know what the firewall rule looks like. It's quite an opaque environment. They're excited about the AWS free tier, so they just use their credit card. They sign up, get an AWS account, and they're off to the races. Within a few hours, they've got RDS provision, an EC2 instance, and they're delivering business value in under a week versus waiting weeks for infrastructure to be deployed. Similarly, totally separate group of users go upon the same journey. They create a sandbox environment and they start playing with serverless architecture, for example, AWS Lambda. But then they heard about a multi-account structure. So now they've got to create the create organization button. They've made their sandbox account a management account, which in the industry is normally a no-no. You try not to have your workloads in your management account, just given you want to reduce foot traffic there. But I suppose the one thing they've done well is they've created separate environments for their kind of non-production and production infrastructure. But then they've gone and put this new CloudFront distribution straight on the internet and started directing their end users there. Now, a totally different business unit. They've started with RDS in a particular region, let's say Sydney, and then they wanted to use an integrating service like, let's say, AWS Lookout, but it's not supported in Sydney. So they just click the drop down. They now provision RDS, transfer the data across, and now they're operating in Japan. Your data jurisdictions are really blown out the water already. A few months have gone past, and your finance team is getting all these separate invoices and asking who's actually paying for this. What projects is this against? And there's this constant battle of chargeback. And then your governance, risk and compliance teams continually asking, like, what security controls do you have across these accounts and organizations? So again, it ends up being a very messy process and there's no central governance across all these different teams. So what is a landing zone? And I'm going to read this pretty much verbatim. So a landing zone is a well-architected multi-account AWS environment that is scalable and secure. This is a starting point from where your organization can quickly launch and deploy workloads and applications with confidence in your security and infrastructure environment. Building a landing zone involves technical and business decisions to be made across your account structure, networking, security, access management in accordance with your organization's growth and business goals for the future. Big difference. So this is a somewhat legacy diagram that's very technically focused, and I think potentially that's why AWS has deprecated it. But I find it great because it is, again, technically focused. It's not this process overview, and it's got a lot of the key components. So one of the things when we talk about data sovereignty is, for example, your network connectivity, network security, and workload isolation, which is kind of paramount when you're operating in the healthcare industry. Obviously, what needs to change a lot when you operate in the cloud, your business continuity. This changes drastically. Hopefully, the burden's reduced quite a lot, but it does change, and you do need to put emphasis on this. Cloud finance management, again, this is something that we don't see done very well. Often, it's normally this constant battle of like which tags you want to apply. We've seen customers want over 50 EC2 tags because they really want to go fine-grained with resource management. And it can go really kind of pear-shaped. So, again, this is a talk specifically on landing zones, so we're going to focus more on these foundational capabilities. There's a lot that goes into this, so I suppose a few key items of which I don't think we should breeze through, particularly on people. Again, I said we're going to focus mainly on tech, but what really needs to happen is you need to have your team fluent in cloud. There's no way that you can architect a great solution if your team's new to cloud. There's a lot of learnings in those initial years of being experienced, and that's normally when you make some of those mistakes, and when you go back to the business and say, oh, I've accidentally done something, it's not going to scale, that's always an awkward conversation, and it's very hard to walk back. A great example is, for example, something as simple as cron jobs. You ask one engineer, they might create an EC2 instance, edit their cron tab and run a job every so often. Some teams might potentially use EventBridge or CloudWatch events if you're a little bit older and still run that, a similar cron tab at an interval using that managed service. But if you've been around and you've kind of bitten the event-driven architecture bug, you might be using an EventBridge filter that only invokes when a particular condition is met. Again, there's no right or wrong answer, but I suppose there's different ways to skin a cat and definitely a more efficient way of operating. Some of it, kind of already spoke about cloud financial management. Organizations are really important for that, and if you follow a multi-account structure, this is simplified dramatically. You can kind of just group accounts and say that's a chargeback for a particular project or landscape. In security, super quick, security governance is kind of when you have your defined account, your roles, responsibilities, and those compliance frameworks that you need to, again, comply with to keep that accreditation. And that security assurance goes back to letting your customers know and those regulatory bodies that, yes, you are still continue to be compliant with those frameworks, and you can actually provide evidence of that. And that's normally where a lot of man hours go in, is kind of showing that traceability. It wouldn't be a talk without a AI-generated image. So AWS is really great at providing services with distinct functionality. But with this, you kind of, as builders and architects, you really need to know how to stack it and integrate them together. Because the landing zone is not just one service, for example, AWS Control Tower, even though it is the managed service for landing zones or multi-accounts, it doesn't integrate all of these services here. It might do one or two, but it doesn't touch GuardDuty, for example. So I think it's really key to understand that. In May this year, Gartner released this particular report, and one of the interesting facts here was cloud satisfaction, that within 2028, over 25% of companies will be not satisfied with how their cloud is working for them. So it's either through reduced efficiencies, inconsistent spend rates, and just not being able to move as fast as you want to move. Multi-cloud and cross-cloud, we'll talk through this in a little bit more detail, particular for this customer. Multi-cloud is, I suppose, this concept of potentially having the same workload in multiple clouds, so Azure, GCP, AWS, and cross-cloud is obviously having some kind of network connectivity potentially between the cloud. Digital sovereignty, again, it says next generation, but I'd argue it's kind of here and now, especially with some of the tooling in the AI space, where that data is sent is obviously paramount. Another thing that's come up quite a bit over the last few years, if you think AWS has been around quite a while, is a kind of decaying landing zone with older techniques on how to implement certain features. So what we see is, again, back to that cloud dissatisfaction, customers aren't able to get the speed to value as they would like, and they continue to be frustrated with how much it's costing and the burden of operations. So what we often do for customers these days is we kind of help them move to a shinier, well-architected structure. And again, there's multiple ways of doing this, but ideally what we can do is move it in place. So kind of introducing a new framework. So a quick customer intro. This customer operates over 4 states. They have over 18,000 staff, both care providers and in the corporate area. They operate in hospitals, aged care, home care, and a very mixed bag of technology stack. In the healthcare, there's a lot of commercial off-the-shelf products, and for virtualization and remote workers, they kind of use Citrix and VMware. So the intent for the customer was to kind of start and scale as quickly as possible. They weren't clear with their migration strategy into the cloud, but there were a lot of things to consider. They already had a cloud presence, and again, we kind of already understood their remote work kind of requirements. The reason I've called this polycloud is with the multi-cloud, it's kind of multi-cloud is more around running the same workload in multiple cloud providers, whereas polycloud is more running the workload in the right cloud for that particular product or application. So yeah, some things, for example, Entra, I think a lot of organizations start with Entra and Azure because it's a great solution, and definitely this customer was one of those. So the solution provided. So there's already a great intro to the Landing Zone Accelerator, and I suppose what it is a framework to go and integrate all of those different services that kind of make up a landing zone in a cohesive, declarative format. It's written in CDK, Cloud Development Kit, but you don't need to be a TypeScript CDK dev to use the Landing Zone Accelerator. It's supported by a dedicated team of AWS engineers. It's not one of those AWS samples repositories that decays over time with runtimes that aren't supported anymore. I did an audit for a customer. They were slightly out of date, and in the last 12 months they've released over 22 major and minor versions. It's an open source solution, so you can clone the repository. If you see a bug or fix, or you want to introduce something, you can actually submit open pull requests. And again, if you face an issue and you potentially don't have the skills, or you don't have the capacity to fix that issue, you can raise an issue and make it known to the community. And sometimes you can someone in the community will actually put a fix together, which is great. So there's a stable starting point. So essentially, for us as consumers, all you need to use is a set of configuration files. There's no special language, it's a YAML format, so the only real format there is a list and some kind of key dictionary pairs, and that's what really there is to it. Well, the power of that is AWS has created a whole bunch of sample repositories. So for healthcare, for finance, for sensitive workloads, so defense and national security, they have those reference architectures. So you can start with that and you can customize it as you see fit. So the security in depth, this is often very important. So there's the starting point that AWS gives you. For example, when you put in your credit card, and nothing's, I suppose, super secure by default. It's there to kind of get you started and get you bitten by the AWS bug, but it's not potentially the most secure solution. AWS doesn't understand how you plan to use the cloud. It's your responsibility to know how it should be configured. So one of the great things is, for example, KMS keys. The solution will create a lot of KMS or customer managed keys, and all of those services will use those encryption keys by default. And a lot of the forensic information or tooling is configured by default. So for a modest security team or a modest cloud center of excellence, they can focus on the business value. They don't need to keep this thing up to date. They can actually focus on helping unblock those application teams. When you hear AWS open source, you're like, who's going to help me at 2 a.m. when I'm blocked and something's not working? They do have an AWS support capability, and that's kind of bundled into your enterprise support. So the power of having this Landing Zone Accelerator, it's free to use. You only pay for the services that you consume, and you have full control of what you want to enable and disable. So this is a lot of networking, so this is going to be fun, and if you're not in love with networking, I apologize in advance. So for this particular customer, we deployed resources within the Sydney region. I'll just move that cursor. So the network core account, again, moving with a multi-account structure, this network core account is going to be solely responsible for all of the networking constructs created within this landing zone. Transit Gateway is deployed, and this is a great networking construct within AWS that provides a uniform platform for integrating VPNs, VPCs, and direct connect into your networking infrastructure. Don't need to worry about different techniques. It's just kind of there in this uniform platform to be able to integrate those different technologies. IPAM has kind of done away with the role of spreadsheets in managing your network ranges within AWS. You can use, basically what we did for this customer is we reserved a large IP range for their use, and then we would segment that into kind of lower level pools. So what will happen is you can go and deploy additional subnets, and that will just take in a contiguous block those particular ranges. So you don't need to slice off those ranges. You just say I want to slash 24, 25, and it will go and carve those out for you and show it all in a nice dashboard. So what we did is we kind of created this network segmentation. So all the different zones, so production, non-production, etc., had its own network segment. With this, we have a dedicated transit gateway subnet. Before I go on, for this diagram, it's already quite small as it is. We are only showing one AZ, but there are all three AZs in this implementation. So with this availability zone, we have our transit gateway ENI. So this ENI provides the connectivity from your VPC into the transit gateway. Again, similar approach with all the other integration methods, but you don't need to worry about it. So the reason we have a reserved subnet is so we don't have clashes. And what happens is we don't actually give this to the end application team. So they don't need to be confused and wonder what this ENI is. It's just, they don't even see it. It's just some magic that the central team provides. So what we do is, again, this network core owns these subnets that we create for these end target accounts, but we just share those subnets using Resource Access Manager with them. So what we do is, because they have their own subnets, this reduces the likelihood of noisy neighbours. So we don't have one account affecting the ability for other accounts to scale up and down as they need to. So for those that know, VPC or route tables, you cannot remove that local route for the VPC. So by default, all of these workloads can talk to each other. And this was acceptable for the customer because, let's face it, a lot of the network connectivity is sometimes unknown and they weren't entirely sure where they wanted to land. So you still have your security groups to maintain that connectivity and restrict only to certain cross accounts. But that might not be appropriate for all workloads. You may have a super sensitive workload. And this is where we use the same pattern, but we provision it purpose-built for a particular workload. So again, same kind of approach, but what is more in play in this fact is we use transit gateway route tables to control who can talk or will be aware of this VPC or this network segment. So this is where we can control that. But if there was a scenario where this application workload would need to talk to this one, by default, they would be able to speak to both accounts, which is something you don't want to do. This is where we talk to a network firewall in a second. Shared services is something that comes up quite a bit, and this is, for example, AWS workspaces, so your remote workforce, or your manage Active Directory. So for these use cases, you don't want to create multiple versions of them. So your central identity stored, you don't have multiple versions if you don't want. Again, you don't have a central place to do that authentication. So this is where the transit gateway route tables allow that connectivity through all your network segments. And again, you'll notice that there's a separate account for this purpose. So whoever maintains those Active Directories, they have access to that account and that account only. We haven't provisioned it in the network core account because, again, that's likely not their responsibilities. They're likely an Active Directory admin. But when an account isn't required, we've provisioned the central VPC. And this VPC has typically two types of technologies. Route 53 endpoints, this is providing both inbound and outbound DNS resolution from external resources. And again, this all relies on the transit gateway routing and underlying network constructs. VPC endpoints allows all of the accounts to be able to use AWS endpoints without going out to the public internet. This is really powerful. Again, you're restricting access out to the internet, and there's a significant cost saving using the centrally. In the Landing Zone Accelerator, this is quite easy. There's a lot of complexity to this. It uses private link behind the scenes, and you need to update Route 53 on hosted zones. It's quite complex if you need to do it yourself. Again, this is 2 line items in the solution itself. But we've spoken about this, and as you can see, there's no NAT gateways or internet gateways. How does stuff get out and in from the internet? So we've created a network edge account. So the reason this is a separate account and not just part of the network core is sometimes teams don't have the capability in-house to manage firewalls. So for this solution, we've used Network Firewall, which is, again, an AWS managed service, but you can replace this with a next-gen firewall like Cisco. So with the traffic flow, what this looks like is if you have a workload that needs to go out to the internet, using the VPC route tables, you would say that 00 goes to your transit gateway, then magic would happen where the transit gateway ENI would direct it out to your transit gateway. Based on the transit gateway route table, it would say that 00 out to the internet needs to hit this VPC attachment, flows through to your network firewall, and this is where you have your DNS resolution whitelisting, for example. So you could try and resolve it to IPs, but like with most SaaS providers, those IPs change over time, right? So you kind of, DNS resolution is the way to go, but if you have something more complex, you can superimpose that with an open source Silicon set of rules. And then we see our NAT gateway out to the internet. A great benefit, again, was centralized ingress and egress, cost consolidation. You only have 3 NAT gateways for all of your workloads within the landing zone. So the inverse. so coming out from the internet. Similar approach, you hit your firewall. This is where you can have rules like making sure you're potentially coming from your Cloudflare IPs or particular ports or protocols you want blocked. You can block it before it even hits your publicly facing load balancers. And you'll notice there's public load balancers, and again, in the separate accounts. So your application teams can't just pop something on the internet. This is kind of key when you're having sensitive data, right? You kind of just don't want something accidentally there. Sometimes, again, the AWS checkbox that just says, create me a public IP, it can be your own downfall. So what will happen, these load balancers will then just target the private IP range of these instances. Again, ideally, you have your private load balancer there to handle any rotation of hosts or IPs over time. The firewall VPC. So the firewall VPC is typically for your east-west inspection. So where we spoke about where we particularly want this account to be able to talk to production account 1, but not production account 2, this is where we use this firewall over here. So what we can do there is we can select the subnets from that particular account and any particular ports, for example, or protocols, and you can allow that through or just drop it there. So that's where you can also restrict some of the traffic. And again, that firewall can be collapsed into the egress if you want, but it does simplify some of the observability challenges that you may have going through those rules. Yeah, I did self-quote myself. So before this multi-account structure, you can imagine trying to do this through ClickOps is just an insurmountable task. And also, if you're trying to engineer to automate it, it's also a lot of effort, right? So this is what the account structure looks like, right? There's a lot of empty boxes, there's still a lot of things to be deployed. So identity federation. Identity federation is a concept of using a single identity store for all of your access into your accounts. Creating IAM users is again one of those burdens where you need to rotate credentials, manage people being offboarded. If they've been offboarded, how do they copy the passwords? Like, what's your risk appetite? It's a very complex thing. Identity Center makes it really easy. You set up integration from your identity store into your identity center. And using an automated endpoint, what you can do is, as soon as users are created or groups are added, you have those users sync into the identity store. From those users and groups, you have permission sets where you essentially define roles that will be deployed into those accounts. There's a lot of flexibility with permission sets. You can do both, or three. You can do customer managed policies, so this is something, a policy you define yourself. There's the AWS managed policies that you may be familiar with, like power user, etc. Or you can have inline policies. Inline policies don't rely on that role or that permission being in the account, whereas customer managed policies, they kind of need to be there as a prerequisite. So within our workload accounts, now we've got all of these roles and permissions deployed into the solution. So the reason this diagram is laid out the way it is it kind of shows all the components that go into a landing zone and all the automation that potentially needs to be built. It's showing the value add of using a framework that ideally you don't need to maintain. So Identity Center is deployed into the management account, but is delegated into the security account. What you typically want to do is you want to reduce your foot traffic into the management account because it is that powerful account that has ultimate control over a lot of the activities across your organization. Just a key call out for anyone that goes down this path. When you do delegate to a different account, that account typically can't make changes in the management account. And this is because it's almost, it's a bit of a change in behavior, right? You kind of don't want, let's say, a child making changes on behalf of the parent. It kind of changes that power dynamic a little bit. So again, that's just a key call out there. So this diagram, I know, is hopelessly too small, but it's a great indication of what you can do with preventative controls. In this case, we're talking through service control policies, but in general, preventive controls are those things that are stopping action from happening. So regardless of the permissions that you have, if you have admin style and you can do absolutely everything, service control policies and resource control policies define those maximum permissions that you can do. So this example of wanting to restrict regions, for example, you just say you only want things in Sydney. Let's say you want a certain encryption used, a certain encryption key. You can impose those rules. So it doesn't matter what permissions that user or role has been created over time. Some of the other controls, we want all the forensic information to be there. We don't want people to go turn off those auditing tools because then malicious things may happen and we don't have what it needs to, I suppose, maintain. It's just there by default. One of the powerful things with organizational policies in general is that you can have multiple levels. And there's a concept of inheritance. So with these organizational controls, you can define really broad organization-wide policies that make sense, and then you can refine them the lower down you get in your organization structure for something that's really, really specific. A key example is you may allow a large range of services in particular accounts, but restrict those services in, let's say, a sensitive workload. You don't want AI in a particular account, for example. Detective controls. So you can see there was quite a few things that added in this kind of update. Control tower. So this is it's supposed to be the landing zone managed service, but as I mentioned earlier, the landing zone service or AWS services in general do kind of one or two things. They don't kind of bring everything together, unfortunately. So control tower, the two things it does really great is deploys your AWS CloudTrail across your organization. So CloudTrail is that service that tracks all your API requests across every single member account. And where this is powerful is you can use metric filters and alarms to identify any behavior that you don't want to happen. So you can say any root user access in any account, flag and send me an email or a PagerDuty request or whatever it may be. AWS Config is again one of these forensic tools that allows you to flag resources as compliant or non-compliant. GuardDuty. So GuardDuty is a kind of machine learning tool that uses foundational services. So for example, DNS resolution, VPC flow logs, as well as kind of tracking user behavior over time. And what this will do is it'll flag any kind of behavior that it doesn't see or suit as normal. And also uses threat detection feeds as well. Security Hub is kind of just off to the corner here, but it's really great as a service because all these different services use different login formats, which is really hard to automate and kind of normalize. So like some alerts use a number as a severity, so like 1 through to 10, or 1 through to 12 I think it may be. Some use a colour, so red, yellow, green, and then some use low, medium, high. What Security Hub does is kind of normalize that format into like a severity matrix. So what you can do is at the Security Hub level, you just simply say I want high or above, and you'll get all of those events, all their different formats, to where they need to be. IAM Access Analyzer is another great tool that allows you to continuously refine those permissions over time. Again, it kind of highlights public and cross-account access where it may not be appropriate. Centralized login, in this diagram, it doesn't show too much because again, I was getting very busy. Having all the login in a centralized place is where you can build bolt-ons like SIEM, etc. AWS has a really great diagram for all the log sources if you're new to AWS, and it's a lot to take in. So you have your managed services like AWS Config, GuardDuty, etc. And this is how all the forwarding takes place. You can toggle this as much as you want. One of the great examples where toggling makes a lot of sense is in your CloudWatch logs. So where you have your application teams using dummy logs, etc., what you can say is like, really, that's not really relevant. It's a sandbox account. They don't have access to our corporate data. Don't forward these logs. And you do claw back a little bit of those costs. It doesn't make sense to have them stored for 17, 20 years, whatever it may be. So going back to our networking, what does this look like when deployed in this layout? So what we have here is we have our firewall VPCs, we have our shared services VPCs, you can see our flow logs are enabled there as well. We have our VPC endpoints, again that's used for our DNS resolution as well as hitting those AWS APIs without using the internet. And we have our different production segments, again, to those particular organization units. So what does our application team now need to focus on when they need to deploy their workloads? Literally just deploying their workloads. They don't need to worry about the security frameworks, networking considerations, it's just there for them to use. They don't need to worry about enabling GuardDuty, Config, all of that stuff. All they need to do is their actual work for their particular workload. And providing some of the insights from Security Hub is every time they log in, they'll get that dashboard that says, hey, you have these things that are labeled as critical or high. So they can focus on it. You don't need to tap them on the shoulder. They're continually reminded that there's areas for improvement. Customer value. So there's a very streamlined onboarding process for new workload teams. So there's specific IAM considerations. This again isn't very appropriate, but this is potentially where you want to restrict actions. So we talked about disabling certain services. Potentially you're not comfortable with certain services being enabled for this application type, so adding that into the considerations. Networking allocation, this is always interesting, but what we used was a t-shirt incised approach. So small, medium, large is like how big do you think your workload's going to grow over time. So you don't want to over-provision, and you don't want to under-provision those IP ranges for that particular workload. So I think our small was like a /26, for example, which is still a relatively decent size. Continuous improvements. So you don't need to worry about Lambda deprecation or whatever it may be. The AWS engineering team is continually doing those updates. One of their mantras is, even if there isn't a managed service capability already, they will do the bespoke engineering through technologies like custom resources, and then over time, as the managed service is produced, they will wind back that that custom coding and replace it with the managed service. And there's low overhead to update. It's simply updating a CloudFormation template. It's essentially a self-mutating pipeline that you update the new version. You say, I want to look at this particular branch. So the latest release as of 2 weeks ago is 1.13. It simply clones down the repository and creates its own deployment pipeline. So again, with a very modest IT team, they can keep this up to date over time. Awesome, thank you. A lot of key contributors to this. And also a big shout out to AWS, which is company great in supporting us in the use. And again, it's an open source solution, so if you do want to get involved, start using it. It's always great to kind of get feedback from the community. And also contributions are very, very much welcome. So yeah, awesome. Thank you, everyone.
We'll open the floor to questions. Anyone got questions for Richard?
I'm curious to know, so it was awesome looking landing zone, very cool featured. What requirements, you said it was a healthcare workload, there was a high compliance need. What specific requirements did your customer bring that influenced the design of this landing zone?
So, ironically not much, which again was the first healthcare customer I worked with in anger, and even data segregation was a thing they didn't bring up much concern on. Again, some of the constraints with the commercial off-the-shelf products were kind of challenging. So another great framework or industry standard AWS has is called the Trusted Security Enclave Sensitive Edition, which is what they use for kind of national security and defense. So again, this architecture was kind of already out there from one of our internal engineers or principal solution architects, Ashish. So we kind of modeled that, and that's where we had that kind of network segregation as well as that kind of in-place firewall. And we kind of just started really, I suppose, hard with the customer. And so like, let's go as secure as possible, and then if we need to walk back over time, we can do that. So pretty much everything was dialed up to the max, all of the security frameworks, AWS best practice, etc. And again, because all of the automation was there, it's relatively low effort. Doing bespoke engineering for something like this, especially in the market, customers expect this done in like 2 weeks. And anyone that's used AWS, it's not, you can't just click a few buttons and output that. So again, that's always a hard thing with people moving into the cloud, is they underestimate the amount of effort it is to kind of build something like this and kind of bring out those requirements. So again, like that networking model, like some people might see that your workloads can all talk to each other in the network segment, but the customer really didn't know how their systems were interacting. So we kind of started with that, okay, everything can talk there, you still have your security groups, so the application teams can work across themselves to make sure that they could talk to each other. And if they had to be kind of cross-segment, that's where we'd introduce the firewall to make sure the right protocols were being used, and it wasn't just kind of free reign. Everything can talk to each other, because unfortunately, I think that's what a lot of it was on the on-prem world. The firewall, I think over time, it ends up looking like Swiss cheese. There's just kind of holes everywhere. Any other? Did that answer it? Sorry?
It did. I've got other questions, but I'll wait.
How long did you complete service?
Yeah, great question. So it was scheduled for 12 weeks. It took about 16. And the reason it took about 16 weeks is we laboured the networking to death. Because the customer came from this on-prem mantra of like how networking should be. They didn't understand the networking construct within AWS. So we really wanted them to understand what networking looked like in AWS, because we would hate to build this entire thing and then them not understand what they've received and how to operate in it. So a lot of the, I suppose, the building time, you could probably get it done. And again, because we have the architecture now, you could do it very quickly, but a lot of it's just bringing the customer on the journey and helping them understand. If, like for this, if I wanted to create one now, because I have the reference code, it would be done in 2 hours. So if you can provision all of that, once you have your files, within 2 hours, because that's how long the pipeline takes. And that includes vending an account, creating your networking, all that kind of good stuff. It just kind of happens and runs through. Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Myself, Ashish, I just wanted to know, with this beautiful architecture, how much was the client billing per month?
So the run costs, so in the entire diagram, the most expensive thing you'll ever see in your life will be a network firewall. Those firewall endpoints will, are we still recording the questions for AWS? It's fine, I'll be, I suppose, very diplomatic. Firewall endpoints aren't cheap. Whether, I'm sure they're just as expensive in another cloud provider. So I'm pretty sure firewall endpoints, and again, you saw 3 availability zones and 3 VPCs. I think it's roughly about $1,600 per VPC. So they're paying about $6,000 in just networking firewall costs. But again, all of the cost consolidation, they only have 3 NAT gateways, right? So like NAT gateways are pretty much $50 a pop per availability zone, and we only have 3 of them across the entire infrastructure. So yeah, it's roughly about $6,000. You can consolidate. What we did before the end of the engagement is we collapsed that egress VPC and the east-west firewall, because the customer just said, this is a little bit too rich, let's collapse it. So you still kind of had your egress kind of collapsed into that one VPC, but we still kept the egress one separate. But yeah, it's roughly about that. And if you want, I can dig up the pricing calculator so you can get an indication of what that looks like. Go for it.
I wanted to ask that question about the amount of time that it's spent to build infrastructure, but what about the amount of time to get to a definition of stable?
Yeah, so interesting question, and I'll try to answer it what I think the answer should be, and I suppose let me know if it solves it for you. So, and I think I do want to kind of cover my answer with something I'd like to talk about, because people that use the solution for the first time wonder why it takes as long as it takes. So the pipeline itself is a sequential thing. It doesn't kind of randomly do things, because as you know, for AWS, there's a lot of dependencies. You kind of can't create, for example, a service with encryption without a key. You can't do certain things without roles and permissions. So the pipeline is about an hour duration now. It's sped up quite a bit. When we started this project, the pipeline took about 2 hours. So if you imagine you're trying to iterate on the solution and the pipeline takes 2 hours, you can imagine if you do a typo in the config, for example, it's very, very painful. There's a CLI, so when you do an active development, we encourage people to use the CLI, and that's where you can iterate really quickly. And if you've used CDK, it's simply a synth and deploy, so it's quite quick. As far as stable, I suppose once the design's done, it's just the engineers potentially tweaking things as they go. So I think the hardest thing is getting the design sorted with the customer, and again, kind of relaboured the networking, because they just wanted a flat subnet. They said one subnet, and I just couldn't wrangle that with them, that they just wanted everything to talk to each other. So, and again, they can move to that over time if they have to, but we started with at least having those network segments kind of instilled for that. Did that answer the question?
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
What I meant to say stable is that if you're trying to migrate one environment to another, like an on-prem to the cloud, usually building something like the landing zones are very easy, because it's a known problem already. But once you start migrating the products in, you run into issues like, oh yeah, this port's blocked, you can't do this. And then you have that a lot of back and forth on your sides.
Yeah, so like with that, again, like what we do is with our assessments, we kind of we run a whole bunch of tools that kind of do that information of like, for example, network traffic from a particular host, because let's face it, it's always normally networking that is the main blocker, right? So we run a lot of those tools to kind of get an indication of the connectivity requirements, but we also have all the logging kind of available to kind of troubleshoot that. And again, sometimes it's just working with the teams to understand. Again, with a lot of the customers, sometimes they just don't know. So it's a lot of kind of just working with them and just setting this along more side, because you can't just rush it, because you don't want to just start poking holes in that firewall, because you just end up with on-prem version 2 in the cloud versus having something that's more secure.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
What happened to the on-prem stuff?
Yeah, so they're still busy migrating. So yeah, they plan to get out of the data center. The main driver for this was actually just VMware costs. So that was their main thing, to kind of get off the extortionary licensing cost. They're on their way, and they're going to slowly reduce the rack size over time.
So what was security strategy to avoid DDoS attacks? Because network firewall that AWS provides doesn't provide a shield against DDoS.
Yeah.
So how did you?
Yeah, so like it probably wasn't in that diagram, but one of the, I suppose, the nice things of having that centralized network edge account is you just attach, for example, your AWS WAF against those particular load balancers. So that's kind of what we did for them. They did have a public website. That was the first solution. It was actually purpose-built in the cloud. It wasn't a direct migration. They did an external company hosted it, and then we ported it into them. And that was actually prior to finishing this project. So typical customer wanted both at the same time, so we're building them in lockstep, which was interesting. But yeah, it was just an AWS WAF in that network edge account.
Yeah. And one thing that maybe I missed, what was the backup strategy for that?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, right? Because with a landing zone, there's so many components, and again, that's something that people that overlook. With this particular customer, they didn't have an external third-party tool. So that was one thing. So we started them with AWS Backup, and simply what we did, and again going with like AWS organization policies, we just defined tags that they needed to have in particular instances, and then just using AWS Backup to do that for them. So again, that was an organization policy that we defined, and again within the Landing Zone Accelerator, you can easily deploy vaults to any of those accounts. So when you get your account vended, you've already got a vault, you've got the permissions, etc. that you need. So any instance that's launched there and it has the correct tags will be backed up based on the organization policy. And then they can still use whatever backup policy if they have other requirements that don't suit that organization-wide one. We didn't define specific application ones because they didn't actually have any requirements at the time. So they could do that themselves and go to the same vault. Good?
So I'm Vichi here. I'm the solution architect. Currently, I'm in the process of building the AWS Landing Zone for my organization.
Yep.
So with all these things that you have already completed, right? I'm just starting the process now.
Yep.
While I'm designing or while in the implementation stage, what do you think is the main challenge that I may face, which you have faced?
Yep.
You want to tell me?
Yeah. I think, again, getting the customer to understand, I suppose, the solution they're aiming to build, that's always the challenge. And again, we spend so much time with it because they spend a lot of time and effort and money to get us to build it for them, and we wanted them to be happy with what they're getting. And I think, so I'm a techie at heart. I have solution architect in my title, but I don't use it very often. Engineering focused. Trying to build this and do bespoke engineering is, unless you've got a large engineering team, is next to impossible. Keeping up with the pace of Amazon engineering is, unless you're as big as Amazon, how can you keep up with them if you're trying to put some abstraction on top, right? So I think if we weren't using that, that would be one of our biggest challenges. So if you have, if you have a mandate to use something else and it's potentially not as fully fledged, it's always hard when you get into that implementation. You've potentially quoted for a customer, it's going to take you this time, but the engineers are saying, well, that's not in our framework, they still got to build it. Trying to build this in 16 weeks, you wouldn't be able to do. It's just, it's impossible. So I think, yeah, there's definitely on the implementation side, if you don't have something as fully fledged as the solution, it's impossible. And you can't click ops this, because it doesn't scale very well.
Yeah. because there are like 4 to 5 individual accounts who are already created
Yeah.
with their own credit cards, and we are now trying to build
Yeah.
landing zone. So
Yeah.
in the process, I was just thinking that because other answers were already given, I was just thinking which challenge I may face.
Yeah. So like, I'll talk through this because brownfield to greenfield again, it comes up quite a bit. One of the interesting things there is if they don't have an Amazon organization for those accounts and they're standalone accounts, the migration into an organization is relatively painless. As soon as you have an organization around that account, you have to do a real assessment of if there's any, let's say, identity policies that say only this OU, right? Because as soon as you move that account from that OU, you have to update all those policies. So if you've got a standalone account, the migration process can be relatively easy. If you have an account that is in an organisation, again, that's a little bit more challenging, and you have to do a little bit more assessment. There's certain resources that don't play very nice with that. But if you want to chat to me afterwards, I'll give you a few tips because, it comes up quite a bit. I'll Google the tool we've used for a little bit of kind of insights. Because it's an open source tool and you can build some really good dashboards to try to help empower your practice.
Awesome. That's very awesome. Cool.
I've seen a lot of exciting networking features come out in AWS recently.
Yep.
What's your favourite and why?
Great question. I unfortunately don't have a favourite in the last kind of 12 months. But I suppose the thing I really liked of this approach is using that shared networking model, where you don't expose the customer to those management subnets, so they don't get confused with like, oh, what is this subnet? What do I need? Like they don't have that awareness because I suppose seeing application teams do the day-to-day, they might not be networking gurus. So it's kind of nice to say, hey, these are your 3 subnets. If you're going to have something that's going to use more than one, try to spread it across all of the availability zones. It kind of makes more sense. Do you have a favourite networking service that's been deployed?
I do, but I haven't been able to use it yet. So Route 53 released a DNS firewall feature where you can prevent DNS exfiltration attacks.
Yeah. Okay.
I haven't had a reason personally to build it, you might think, but the platform engineering allows it such that I don't get to play with those services so much. More of a customer, I think. Yeah,
okay. And a shout out to the AWS Landing Zone team, that's not in the LZA yet. So intend to raise an issue and see if they're going to implement it. I believe they do have a lot of Route 53 features planned for later this year, which would be interesting. So hopefully that's on there. I think at the moment it's kind of Route 53 profiles, which I haven't personally used, but apparently they're keen to get it out. So.
And IPv6, of course.
Yes. Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of uptake in IPv6, but you never know. Next year might be the year. Any other question?
We got time for one more question?
Yeah.
It was a really cool network diagram, and I'm probably not the only person in the room that didn't get a chance to take a photo of the final one before you moved on. So I'd love to be able to. But I'm also curious to know, like, not on your networking.
Oh, yeah.
How much code was involved? How much in terms, does LZA come with a bunch of constructs that make your life easy, or was this a lot of code for you?
You don't even need a code. It's definitely it's just YAML, which is amazing. I don't want to oversimplify it. For example, you create a service control policy. You still create that service control policy in a natural JSON language, as you would kind of in the console. And you just store that JSON file in your repository. And then in your configuration, you say, hey, I want to create the service control policy for this organization unit or these accounts, and it just manages it for you. So
with LZA, you were able to create this entire network only with configuration?
Yes.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, which, again, unfortunately the customer didn't appreciate using a framework like this because they hadn't built it before, right? But that's just the name of the game, right? So I know being in consultancy for a while, you've got time pressure, and sometimes you leave a customer not being happy with what you've given them because they've just been on this time crunch, where we were really proud leaving this with them with this, and with a framework that can scale with them over time, because let's face it, you don't build a landing zone to be done in 2 years, and you don't want to be a brownfield to greenfield in the next 5 to 6, right? So, so everything I've shown has been done through Landing Zone Accelerator. One of the big features that was actually recently released in 1.13 was a change to the networking constructs. When they originally created it, let's say it had a scaling issue, and I'll chat to you a little bit more if you want to talk about it, whereas now that limit's been increased, which is awesome. And they've recently released some other good things where like declarative policies and resource control policies, which, resource policies were a little bit longer to be released than would have liked. But again, that's another great thing for like data, jurisdiction things. So again, it's all codified in a whole bunch of YAML files and like IAM policies and stuff. Again, you just kind of put it in there.